That's good. So you know this stuff.
Paula,
Yes.
is this you today?
No, it's you.
Oh, I love it. And we're recording this. That's good stuff.
You've just demonstrated one of the best ways to start a presentation. And
I
that is
sure
just to
did.
be silent. Because that way everybody's going, hey, what's going on? This is exciting. Is somebody going to speak? Good job, Brent.
I'd like to officially pause and say I apologize for that. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brett Augustine, a recovery business advisor for North Central Texas, North Central Small Business. I'm going to start all over again, guys. I haven't had enough coffee and I thought I was good to go. So, right? One more time. Good morning, everybody. This is Brett Augustine, a recovery business advisor for North Central Texas Small Business Development Center, which is a leading provider for assistance for small businesses. We are grant funded, which allows us to offer services at no cost to you. And today we're going to be speaking about, I apologize, guys. I have lost my mind. Give me one moment. I'm glad to see everybody's here and saw my meltdown. Okay, let's start completely from the top. We have Lorna with us this morning, and it was, I'm Brett Augustine, recovery business advisor for North Central Texas Small Business Development Centers. We're a leading provider for small businesses. We're grant funded, which allows us to offer services at no cost. Today we're going to be talking about designing your presentation, a 6-step formula presented by Lorna Kibbe. And we're looking forward to seeing Lorna. If those of you that don't know Ms. Lorna, she's an ASBDC speaker and has been for many years. And we're very proud to have her this morning. She's also a leadership specialist and coach. And if you would please welcome Ms. Lorna Kibbe.
Hello, everyone. Brett, you know, you just demonstrated a great skill because this happens to people in presentations all the time. And I love the way that you just said, give me a minute, stopped, regrouped, and came back. That was perfect. You just demonstrated that for our audience. I mean, that is a great example because this happens to us all the time. You know, it's especially in the opening, it's like a little bit of nerves, a little bit of like, where are we? And we were talking about all kinds of things before it started, which is normal. So thank you for that great demonstration. That was perfect. You did exactly what you should do. I'm so proud of you. Wow. All right. I'm sharing my screen here so that we can talk about making amazing presentations. And as I hope you know, this is a series. So last week we talked about making effective presentations. And now we're going to start to drill into some specifics about presentations. And today we're going to talk about how to structure it. Next week, we're going to talk about the content that goes into the structure. So we are really breaking this down. And if you stick with us here, you're getting a lot of education on how to do presentations and how to do them right. After this session today, you're never again going to have to worry about how to structure your presentation. I'm going to give you 6 steps that will work every time for any presentation. So this will make your content a lot easier to write and put together. That we'll talk about next week, because once you have your formula, it's just a matter of developing your content and using this formula to make your presentation really great. So the good news about this, I think maybe above all, is that your audience is going to be really excited about this. They're going to be engaged. They're going to be able to follow you, and there's a much better chance that they're going to be motivated by what you have to say. I wonder if you have ever experienced this. You're in a presentation and you're going, what? It's funny because I just came from a conference, and one of the big name speakers that was there did a presentation, and it was supposed to take an hour and a half, and it took an hour and 45 minutes. It was truthfully all over the place. And I was having a little trouble following, that's a long time for a presentation, especially when you're not really sure where you're going next and what the point of this is. And what happens when you experience that is that you kind of tend to tune out a little bit. Have you ever done that? You find yourself thinking about other things. Honestly, at one point I even thought, is it over? Isn't that terrible? It's like, well, so we have a real responsibility to engage our audience and to make sure that we're giving them what they need. And by structuring our content so that it's easy to follow and people know exactly where we are, we really help with that. See, here's the thing. It's inevitable. People are going to tune out. I mean, that's normal. My feelings, my tuning out at this point or that point and going, where are we? Is it over? That's perfectly normal. Even if it's a dynamite, amazing, like edge of my seat presentation, that's going to happen, especially for that length of time, an hour and 45 minutes. It's going to happen. Our brains simply cannot focus on one thing for that long. Doggone it, being human, right? So it's going to happen. But all of a sudden, I'm ready to tune back in. Where are you? If I have a clear understanding of where you are from the beginning and where you're going, then I can come right back. And that makes it a lot easier for me to re-engage and pick right up where my brain decided I would leave off while I thought about what I was going to have for lunch, right? So this is why it's so important for us to have a solid structure. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to give you a very solid structure that you can use over and over again. Anytime you're going to make a presentation, you can start with this and you can be sure that it won't fail you. So first things first, let's talk about what we're going to do today, because I want you to be clear on where we're going so that if you tune out, you'll know where we are and where we're coming back to. First, how to get started. And that's where I'm going to go next, is how to get started with this entire process. And then I'm going to go through the parts of the presentation, part by part, to explain to you what those are. And then finally, I'm going to give you a heads up on what's next and what you can do in the future to help use this content that I'm giving you today and to continue with the series so that you'll be able to really have a big education on how to do presentations. Okay, so first, we have to know the purpose of our presentation. Before I even start to talk about presentation, what your presentation is going to have in it, what the content's going to be, what the structure is going to be, you have to be clear on what is the purpose of this thing. Why are you giving a presentation? What's the point? I mean, can you just tell me, like in one sentence, why are you making the presentation? What do you want your audience to take away? What do you want them to take away? For me, the purpose of this presentation is I want you to take away a structure that you can use specifically time after time in making any presentation. That's what I want. It's important for me to clarify that because there's so much content on doing presentations that if I'm not careful, I'm going to stray off the mark. I'm going to start including other things that are important. And I have to go back to my purpose when I'm developing this structure and developing my content to remind myself over and over that if it's not tied to this specific purpose, it doesn't belong in this presentation. That's another presentation. So the first thing is, what's the purpose? And for today, it's to teach you a structure that you can use over and over when making any presentation. Now, if I start to wander into other areas, I got to throw that out because it doesn't apply specifically to this presentation. You have to define that for yourself very clearly. I think sometimes what happens to us, I don't know if you've had this happen, but I'm told I need to make a presentation and I'm not clearly told on what. It's not very clear what exactly they're asking me to present on, what they want me to do. I used to have this happen all the time when I worked for Children and Families, the Department of Children and Families. I would be told I was supposed to come in and talk to the leadership group about our progress. And I'm like, what about our progress? I mean, we have our hands in so many things. Like, what specifically do you want? Do you want me to present statistics on, how we're meeting our standards? Do you want me to talk about how our children are doing that are in the system? Do you want me to talk about how many adoptions we did last month? What specifically? So that's something for you to know, is that if someone else is asking you to make a presentation, really work with them on making sure that you both agree on what that purpose is. I see this all the time, and my business now is I'm a professional speaker, and I speak mostly on leadership. I speak on presentation skills. I recently got my certification, as Brett said, as a coach, a speaking coach. And I have to be, anytime someone asks me to speak for them, first thing I have to do is really clarify with them what's the purpose and make sure that we're both on the same page on what the purpose is. Until I do that, I'm not ready to start developing that presentation. I'm not ready to even think about structure. So first things first, you have to be clear on your purpose. That will help you in everything else when it comes to developing and delivering that presentation. Also, first things first, you've got to take some time to know your audience. It's really important for you to think about, who are these people? Who's going to be out there hearing this presentation? Is it just like, could it be anybody, or are they all in the healthcare profession? What's going on with this audience? Do your best to research, understand where they are. If you can get an idea of how much they already know about the topic that you're going to talk about, that would be so helpful, because that will help you to figure out what kind of questions they're going to have. And if you can figure out what kind of questions they're going to have, then how about you answer them as part of your presentation, So getting to know your audience is really important. I talked about last week in effective presentations, one of the big things is relevancy. And I really believe in that. Whatever audience you have, trying to make everything that you do really relevant to that audience is important. So those are the two things I say. You got to do these things before you start to look at your structure or your content or anything else. You need to be clear on your purpose, and you need to do some work on figuring out who's going to be in this audience and what's going to work best for them. So those are your first things. Then you're ready to start talking about organizing this thing. Now, here's the sad thing. This is a real picture that I took when I was organizing a presentation. This was before I really understood how to do it right. Because if any of you have done this, this is what I would do. I'd open my PowerPoint, because PowerPoint is a great tool for making an outline. And then I'd start dumping all this stuff in here that I thought needed to be there, Maybe I hadn't clearly defined my purpose so well, so I started doing all this. And then I found out I had like a quadrillion slides. And part of the reason that happened to me frequently is because I would start to go to other presentations and say, oh, this applies. Let me put this in here. Oh, let me try that slide. And then I'd have so many slides, I didn't know what to do. Then I would print the slides, put them out on a board and say, which one goes with which, how to organize it. This is the wrong way. This is the wrong way. And it's very labor intensive. I should have done a better job first of figuring out my structure, exactly what it would be, line that up under my purpose, and then it would have been much clearer what to do. Could have saved myself a lot of time. So here's just a couple of tips on this. First is to identify and outline your main points and your subpoints. And I'm going to talk to you exactly about how to figure out what those main points should be. Your structure has to be clear and logical. I'm going to give you that formula in just a minute. Transitions, smooth and effective. I'm going to talk about transitions today. One of the failures in some presentations, and I think this is one of the problems I was having when I was listening to the presentation I was telling you about earlier. It's just there weren't transitions. It's just like, here's point number 1, point number 2, and now I'm on point number 10. And there was no way to tie those points back together so that it all made one message. So I'm going to talk to you about that. That's transitions. And less is more. Many people, when they're developing presentations, do what I was doing here, just so much stuff. And you really have to make sure that it's succinct and that you're getting exactly the content that people need and not just putting in extra stuff because it's interesting. Yeah, you got to know all that interesting stuff, and we'll talk about that more in content, but everything doesn't get dumped into the presentation. The mistake that I made early in doing presentations was way too much content, way too much on overload. And that's, I think, what was happening in the presentation I was watching earlier this week. Had like 12 main points. It's like, well, I don't know. So people were taking pictures of the slide to try to remember what he was talking about, because I can't remember 12 points. We'll talk more. So here are your 6 steps for a structure. And I'm going to go through these one by one and detail them. But it's really a very simple formula. if you look at this, you might want to take a picture of this slide, right? There's 6 steps. First, you do your open. I'm going to tell you about how to do your open. And then point 2 is your transition to your main point. You have to have a transition. You don't just open and then go. You have to give people kind of a tease of what's coming, like make them get ready for it, And then you have your main point. And then you're going to repeat for however many main points you have. 3 is a good number. People remember 3s. So let's say we have 3. So you're going to transition to your main point, do your main point, and then for point number 2, you're going to go back and transition again and talk about main point 2. And then for main point number 3, you're going to transition to main point 3, talk about main point 3. Then you have your closing transition and your close. So it's really just opening, transitioning to your main point, do your main point for however many times you need to do it, you repeat it, closing, transition, and close. That's how to structure it. Every time you're doing a presentation, this is how to do it. It would work every time. So let me go into detail about the different parts here, and we can talk about that. The first thing is your opening. And we talked a little bit about opening when we talked about effective presentations. And it's something that we need to talk about a lot because it's a very important part of beginning your presentation. Actually, Brett displayed 2 important things too. And I know he didn't do it on purpose, but honestly, one of the best ways to open is just to be quiet for a minute. When I did my presentation that I just did in Collier County, I just stood on the stage and took a deep breath and was just quiet. Like the audience, wherever there was buzz, it stopped because they're like, hey, there's a speaker up there. She's not saying anything. I wonder if she forgot what to say. This is so exciting. So now they're tuned in, right? And in my mind, I'm going, okay, the first thing I'm going to say is, so I just stand there and smile for just a few seconds and then begin. That's a really effective way to open. Because I know when we were all looking, oh, this is a little awkward. Nobody's saying anything, but it got our attention. And that's what an opening is supposed to do, is get your attention. So actually that was pretty cool, even though I suspect it wasn't on purpose. How to open is important. Some people think that jokes are good. I wouldn't recommend jokes for an opening because we're just too sensitive these days. There's too many ways that can go wrong. So I wouldn't recommend that. Maybe telling a story or asking a big, powerful question or maybe a startling statement that wants them to know more. There are some activities you can do in the opening. Again, I think that's a little dangerous. Whatever you're doing for your opening, it has to set your audience up so that they know what you're going to talk about. Like one opening that I saw that, okay, you've maybe seen this before. It's kind of interesting. One speaker was talking about change. They were going to tell us all about, how to handle change. So they asked everybody, and you can try this with me if you want. They asked everybody to just fold their arms. So just go ahead and fold your arms. This was their opening. So everybody fold their arms. Okay, now you've got your arms folded. Now switch them. Fold them the other way. And honestly, I had a little trouble doing that because I always fold my arms the same way, And I said, see, that's the problem with change. It's not easy. Yeah. Okay, that was pretty cool. It got everybody's attention. It's like, this is a little change. All you have to do is switch your arms around. You don't know how to do it, So maybe some little activity like that, is good to get everybody involved. But don't go too crazy here. The important thing is to convey your purpose. Your audience needs to shift their focus in your opening to you. Remember that when you come in, people have all kinds of ideas in their head. They're thinking about all kinds of things, and it's probably not about you or your topic. So the main purpose of your opening is to get everyone's attention so that they will shift their focus to you and be focused on the topic that you have. Goodwill, just a little smile, just a little enthusiasm to let them know this is going to be fun. And, you're credible, establishing your credibility, which means being confident when you start, when you open, getting their attention in whatever way you deem appropriate. Statistic, a story is a great thing to start with. And just, again, make your purpose known. Make sure that they understand what your purpose is. Now, the thing about opening is you think that you understand opening. We've talked about opening before in some other presentations. But the fact is, opening is not just this one thing. It's really three parts. So the first thing I call it is a big bang. And the big bang means that somehow you've got to get my attention first thing. And being silent, that's a big bang. Anything that grabs my attention first thing. You have to be careful what you say first, because that's the first impression that people are going to have. So make your first words worthwhile. The big mistake that we make is saying something like, "Hi, I'm Lorna. I'm really happy to be here with you today. How's everybody doing?" You already lost most of your audience right there. So you need to start with being upfront about what your purpose is. A question. Have you ever done this? Have you ever been in a presentation where, right? Remember that? So your opening is really important. The second part of your opening, though, is this, a big promise. I made you a big promise. Do you remember my big promise? I said that you're going to learn how to structure your presentations today so that you'll never have to worry about it again. A big promise. It's like a tease. It's something that people go, okay, yeah, I do want to know this. The thing is if they go, well, then you got problems. So you really need to think about that big promise. It's essentially your purpose. It's essentially your purpose. That's essentially how you're conveying your purpose to your audience. Last week, we talked about effective presentation skills. You might remember then, my big promise was, today you will learn 5 must-dos for maximizing effectiveness for any presentation. Now, see, if somebody hears that and they go, I want to know what those 5 things are. I want to know what those steps are to structure my speech, then you're good. But if they go, yikes, right? Because that means they're not interested from the start. So I think what you could call it is it's kind of the so what test. Okay, so I'm going to learn how to structure my presentation so I never again have to worry about it. So if you're thinking, tell me more, I've hit a home run. But if you're thinking, who cares? Yikes, right? Because that means you don't have the audience there who's interested in what you're going to talk about. So you really that's why you have to start with what's your purpose and who's in your audience. So come up with that big promise, tell them exactly what they're going to learn today and when this is over, what they're going to be able to do with it. That's your big promise. And then the third part of your opening is your roadmap. My roadmap today. I'm going to show you how to get started. I'm going to talk to you about the parts of the presentation, and then we're going to talk about what's next. People need a way to follow you. And so you give them like the 3 things or, whatever your roadmap is for the day. Last week, we had a 5-step roadmap. Last week, you'll remember this was the roadmap. Presentation must-dos. That has to be actionable. It has to be engaging. It has to be interesting. It has to be organized. It has to be you-focused. The purpose of the roadmap is that when that person zones out and now they're ready to tune back in, can they find you? Or have they missed so much that they can't even get back into the presentation? They don't even know what you're talking about anymore. So you need to give them a roadmap, an easy plan to follow, so that if they do zone out, they can come right back. Also, there are people that just, they have like little bullet points in their head. They're checking them off as they go. Okay, we've done that part. Now we're on this part, and it helps them to know about how much longer is this going to be? How much longer do I have to listen to this piece? So some people need that. So the roadmap. So see, there's really 3 parts to that open. You've got your big open here. First your big open, your big bang. Like, we started out with, today you're going to learn about this. We made them a big promise, told them what they're going to receive from this. And then finally we show them how that's going to play out. So all of that needs to happen in your open. I know it sounds like a lot, but really when you think about it, it makes sense. Right? Because this is the place where you're hooking your audience. This is the place where you're getting people to stick with you for the rest of this thing. So that's how we do our open. It's really 3 parts. The big open. Big open. Now they're on the edge of their seats. They're ready, right? Let's do this. Let's get to those main points that you've drawn them in. You've made them a big promise. You've got their attention. They're ready to go. They see how it's structured. But time out. We're not quite ready to go to the main points. Because before we do that, we have to do the transition. A transition is something that's sometimes missing in presentations. And when it's missing, the presentation becomes very jerky. And it also doesn't seem to make logical sense. You know, the thing is if you have these main points, they need to hook together to accomplish your purpose. If you have 3 points that are completely and totally random, that doesn't really add up in my head. I can't keep track of that, and I probably won't be able to remember that. So somehow you have to find a way to hook these things together. So you need a transition, something like this. So if you're ready to learn how to never worry again, never struggle again when asked to put together a presentation, here we go. Let's examine each part of the structure and how to do it right, beginning with your opening, which has 3 parts. Or this, which is what I used. Let's examine each part of this structure and how to do it right. Are you already feeling like you know how to do the opening? Well, not so fast, because there are really 3 parts. So that's the transition that I use to get into the opening, you see? So we always have to have some kind of a transition that hooks things together. So, or maybe you can ask a question to tease them along. You know, what do you think is next? But somehow you have to have a transition to take them to the next part. So we've talked about our opening and we understand how that comes together, but now we're ready to move into our main point. But we can't move into the main point until we have a transition. So now that we understand transitions, we're ready to go to our main points, which will be, the first one will be main point number 1. So you see how I transitioned you and got you ready for the next step there. All right, so in deciding on main points, first thing is to make sure you've clearly defined your purpose, because that's going to help you to decide on your main points. And this is where we go back to your big promise. I promised you that today you're going to learn a structure that you can use for making any presentation, and you can use it over and over again. If I have any content that does not fit into that big promise, it doesn't belong in this presentation. So I start looking at my main points, you know, because you make an outline, you know, of the main things you want to talk about. And then you throw stuff out because it doesn't fit into your purpose. It doesn't fit into your big promise. Main points should typically last no more than 10 minutes, to be straight with you. Now, I know there are some presentations where it's technical and it needs to be longer, and that's good. But just remember, the longer you go on one subject, the less chance you have of me being able to stick with you. So typically about 10 minutes is the max for a main point. That's about how long it takes for your audience to be able to stick with you. And that helps you in planning, because if you're doing, let's say you're doing a 45-minute presentation, you can kind of figure out how many main points you can probably get in there based on that time. If you have to do 10 minutes on each main point, you got, I would say, 3. And that would leave you 15 minutes to do your open, which we know now has 3 points. So it's not just, hi, I'm here, let's go, right? You have to do your close, which we have to talk about how to do the close, and you might need to do Q&A. So 3 main points is the most you could do. So that helps you if you have a 2-hour presentation, and you know, maybe you can either choose to do more main points, or you can maybe lengthen the time for each main point, but you're going to have to be careful how you break that up so that people can stay with you. But we'll talk about that in content next week. So usually I think 3 is a good number because people can remember 3. So yeah, but we'll talk more about content next week. The next big question is how do you decide what order to line up your points? You know, because you have these 3 main points that you've decided on or whatever, you know, how do you decide in what order they go to? Again, it needs to be some kind of logical order that I can follow with my little brain sitting in my little chair. You know, so there are some things you could do, like let's say you're doing some historical presentation on World War I. You could do that in time order, like what led up to World War I or whatever the incident is. So first this happened and then this happened. So you could do time order so that I can be with you logically and I can figure it out. So maybe the first point is what happened before 1900. The second point is what happened between the years of this. And the third point is, so you would do time order so that it would make logical sense to me. Okay. Maybe you're doing the major duties of the president, and that might be topic order. Like the one that you think is most important is this. This is one of the major duties of the president. And they also have to do this. Maybe that's the second one that you think is most important. So line it up like that, like just topic order based on topic. Or maybe you're doing something on problem solution. We have a problem in our organization. We have to find a solution for this. So there's a problem. Let me explain the problem. For a problem solution, these are the options that we have. And now we're going to talk about the best solution. And I want to get your input on that. So see how that also forms your roadmap? So think about the order that you're going to arrange those main points so that it follows a roadmap and keeps me engaged and able to find you when I get lost, because I'm probably going to get lost somewhere. Sometimes people ask me here in the main points, exactly what should I include? Because sometimes there's too much, it gets overwhelming and ineffective. And this starts to get into content just a little bit, but because I think people struggle with this so much, I'm going to go ahead and show you this. If you're really trying to decide, which main points should I include and what should I ditch? Because I can only include 3 and I've got 14, right? So think about this. First, which one is catastrophic? I mean, if you don't include this information, it's going to shut down your operation. It's going to invite a lawsuit. It's going to cause injury. They have to understand this. This is first. Okay, that's main point number 1, right? And if you have 15 main points, that might help you to choose which ones to include in the time that you have. The second criteria would be, is it critical? The most important things that they need to know, the essentials, things that they would have to repeat to others. And then finally, you can go to common. What do they have to understand well or do most often? And this is just to help you prioritize in case you have so many main points that you can't figure out which ones to ditch. And I don't know, might provide you a little help. Like I said, this gets into content a little bit, but I think it's helpful in helping us to figure out what to keep and what to throw out. Of course, all of these things have to apply to your big promise or they don't belong there anyway. And what I just did there, that's called a callback, calling back to something that I already talked to you about, which helps you to remember content and for it to stick. Again, we'll talk more about that. So now we're ready to move to the next main point, right? Wrong. Because what do we have to do first? We have to transition. Remember, we have to repeat those 2 steps. So we transition, do main point, transition, do main point, transition, do main point. So we have to go back to the transition and try to find a way to get them interested in what we're going to talk about next, main point number 2. There's a couple of important things to do here. And one of those is, make sure that they know where you are on the roadmap. So maybe refer back, when we started, we said we were going to do this, and now we're doing the structure. And we're about to continue with that. We're on the part where we said repeat, remind them of where you are and call back to what you've already talked about. A callback is a really important part of doing a presentation because, like I said, it helps to remember that content. And I just kind of demonstrated that for you a minute ago. But it's a quick summary, a quick reminder of the first main point so that I can pull that forward as you start to talk about the second main point. We want to include those callbacks, and transitions are a really good place to do that. So we did our open, we transitioned to our main point. As we move into the second main point, I have to transition again. So now we're going to main point number 2. So everything that I just talked about with main points applies. And we continue this cycle, right? Transition, main point, transition, main point for however many main points we have. So if we have 3, I would be doing this one more time before I get ready to close. And then we have our transition to close. Now, closing again is not as easy as it sounds because there are really 4 steps to closing. First, you have to signal that you're closing. Then you're going to do your Q&A, then your callbacks, and finally you get to your final words. So let me talk about these things a little bit to help you to know what goes into closing. This all applies to structure because it's all fitting together to make sure that the message is understood and received by your audience and that they'll be able to remember it when they leave the room. So you have to signal that you're about to close. When you're about to close, your audience will respond. And if you say, okay, we're about to close, they'll respond with energy, but probably that won't go real well if you just say we're about to close, because your audience will be done. The same thing happens if you say, let's do questions and answers. People are like, okay, I've heard all the content and I'm done. So you have to be really careful with this to make sure that you don't close yourself down by signaling that you're going to close. So maybe a better thing to do is say something like, let's review what we've talked about so far. Let's review what we've learned today. And then you can go back and go over your 3 main points a little bit. Or, as we begin to wrap up, but just make it clear to them that you're not done, that we're starting to wrap up, we're starting to summarize. We're going to talk about what we've learned today, but don't say, okay, and now we're going to close. Because if you say that to me, you're done and I'm tuning out. Good, time to look at my email. And that's what we don't want. So what I recommend is saying something like, let's just review what we've learned. And then I'll usually put up a slide that, shows like the 3 main points, or maybe the roadmap to show where we are, something that just shows them kind of a summary so they can summarize. So what we've been doing is we've reviewed the first part is that we know we have to establish our purpose first. We know that we have to think about our audience first. And then we're going to go into our structure. We're going to open, and we have the 3 parts of the open that we talked about. You come out and you give a big bang, something that gets their attention. You give them the big promise, which helps them to understand the purpose. And then you show them a roadmap of how you're going to work. From there, we talked about structure, and we're going through the steps of that right now. And now we're on to the last part where we're signaling to close. And then finally, we're going to close. And then we're going to talk about next steps. So the next part of the presentation would be questions and answers before you close. And we talked about this kind of in depth last week, but just in case you missed it, there's a couple of things in doing questions and answers. The first thing is just your wording, to ask, what questions do you have, and not, do you have any questions? If you listen to those 2 things, they're really different. Do you have any questions? Yeah, I'd like to know, the meaning of life, right? But we're asking, what questions do you have, which helps people to really target on the subject at hand. I'm a little hesitant to go too deep into this because I did go pretty deep, but I do want to make sure that people are here who may have missed next week get this right, because this is an important part of your closing to make sure that it all goes well. You never do your questions and answers last thing. The reason you don't is because, like I said, a lot of people check out when you do that. When you say, all right, let's do questions, then it means you're done. And if you don't set yourself up for success, people will start shuffling their papers. Some people will just get up and leave, but they'll stop listening because we're done. And I'm not really interested in everybody else's questions anyway, right? So I'm ready to go. So you have to be careful not to set yourself up for failure in that way by putting that question and answer thing as the very last part of your presentation. Then after that, we're going to transition to our close with callbacks to our main points. And that's essentially what I was doing a few minutes ago when I called back and kind of summarized what we've been doing so far. So remember that you have to have a very specific structure that you can use over and over again, that people will be able to enjoy your presentation and follow it all the way through. And finally, you get to the close. Thought you'd never get there, right? To the close. So you want to leave them on a high. You want to leave them feeling really good and motivated and inspired by what they've heard, so that they really do believe that they can go back and take action on what you've told them. The big recommendation for this step right here is to leave them with one next step, to suggest to them one thing that they should do next. So depending on what your presentation is, you should be able to come up with something. The point of this is if you don't give me an action step, if you don't tell me what to do next, then I've just spent a lot of time listening to this material and I may not have a clue of how to put it in place. Some presenters will make a lot of suggestions for what to do next, and I can't decide on one, so I still do nothing. So this is why we really try in our close to give one next step for people so that they understand what they can do. I just did a speech on happiness, on how to be happy, a motivational type of speech. And I had all these things in there about dealing with change and lots of things, to try to boost their happiness. The one next step I gave them was to something that I knew they could do right now is to start smiling. Smile to the people, smile to the folks around them, smile when they get up in the morning because, hey, they woke up. That's a good thing. Let's be happy. And it spreads happiness by smiling. So that was my challenge to them, was to spend the day thinking about how many times they don't smile when they could just use that as a technique. So just one next step, one thing that they feel good about. The close, we talked about a little bit, but the close is something that might be statistics. It might be a story. It's going to be something powerful that helps me to be inspired and motivated by what I just heard. So that's our structure. We open, and there's 3 parts to the open. We transition to our main point. Then we talk about our main point. We repeat this again for the rest of the main points, however many we have. For every main point, we have to do a transition and then the main point. And as I said, we'll talk specifically about content next week. And I have some really good information for you on developing your content. So we'll get specific into that. Then you have your closing transition and your close. So let me stop now and see what questions you have. Are there any questions that I can answer?
If anybody does have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll be happy to get to them. And Ms. Kibbe will answer the best she can, of course, for us. And if you would like, you can just ask me and I'll unmute you and you can ask out loud. But if you have any questions, and while we're waiting on other people, I did have a question for you, Lorna. You brought up the transitions, and I love the fact that you went straight from point 1 to point 2, and then it didn't feel right, and you said that's right because we're going back to a transition, and that's all the way through a good presentation. And I actually have done a lot of presentations in my time, and I know how important that is. My question is, have you seen or do you suggest creativity during transitions, or just sort of get from point A to your next point in a smooth way rather than a creative way?
Oh, that's a really good question.
And if so, can you give some examples of what works and what doesn't?
Okay, that's a really good question. Have you seen anything that you really like, Brett?
Oh,
Sounds
I have.
like you're thinking of something specific.
Well, no, I've seen a lot of presenters sometimes where they're speaking like sports. You have a lot of sports people that are presenters now, and they come out and they used to play football. So they do all of their transitions are like, and now we've made it to the 10-yard line, and this and this, and they did their whole transition series as its own little piece to help pull them through it. And I thought that was kind of effective because we knew we were going to eventually get to be a touchdown because you could feel it, right? But I didn't know. I was just curious as to whether or not if you suggest it, or if it's better to just.
No, I love that. I love that. That idea. That's a good one. I think you can be fun with your transitions depending on how much time you have, and what you're doing. Again, they have to be relevant. That's the important thing. They have to be relevant. But yeah, you can use even an activity could be a transition. I've done a little activity that relates exactly to what we just talked about. And after the activity, and say, okay, now let's use that going forward and see how that relates to what's next, which is, so it's very easy to transition that way. I think what a transition should do for us is, number one, help our audience move from where we were to where we're going, because we don't want them to be stuck where we were. And number two, I think if it can be a bit of a tease, it's good. So now you like the open, it's like, okay, we're going to do the open, but don't think you know what that is, because it's really 3 parts. And hopefully you're going, what? I've never heard of an opening being 3 parts. That's ridiculous. That's a tease. That's like, okay, now you're going to listen, because how can it possibly be 3 parts? So anything that you could do to get your audience, like to tease them a little bit, like, so I bet you're wondering about this point number 2. I bet you're wondering how to be the happiest person in the world, right? Yeah. Well, let's talk about it. Something to tease them, something to, maybe a question, an activity. I like the sports analogy. That's great. So anything what you're doing is you're just helping me to transition. We're done with point 1. Now let's tie that back in and go to point 2, but we want the points to all tie together. And that's what the transition does for you. So great. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. That was good.
Okay.
Thank you. Good.
Any other questions from anybody?
I have a comment. Lorna, something that you just said a moment ago about questions is something that I was taught whenever I started having to do presentations was, what questions do you have? Open-ended, everybody participate. And then, are there any more questions? Yes or no? It's closed-ended, therefore you're shutting down the Q&A time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's time to move to the next topic.
Mm-hmm.
That's a skill to learn. I mean, to be able to control the presentation in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Just an observation.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Paul. I mean, honestly, I think you get better with it with time when you practice it. Often what I will do is, I'm looking at the clock as we go, like, okay, I got plenty of time for questions here, so I'm going to be cool. But if I'm seeing that it's 3 minutes until the end of the presentation, I'm going to say, I have 2 minutes for questions. What questions do you have? And I'm going to cut it, because, like this person I was talking about that went 15 minutes overtime, that cut into the break of the entire group. And he said, I'm sorry I cut into your break, but, that's basically what he did. And it's like, everybody was ready for that break. You never go overtime when you do a presentation. If you promise, if you say your presentation has done it too, then you're done it too, no matter what. So you really have to watch what you're doing. And if it gets to the end, and there's like the one that I did just this weekend, when I got to the end, there was no time for Q&A, because guess why? That guy had gone 15 minutes over. Wow. That didn't mean I was going to go 15 minutes over. So I had to, on my feet, cut some of my content and cut my Q&A session. So you really have to watch the time, but never, specify a period and cut it off when it needs to be cut off. But what you do, Paula, is you're very gracious about it. You say, I know there may be more questions out there, and I would love to answer them, but I'm committed to getting you guys out of here on time. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to stay around for a few minutes after the presentation. Come and see me. And by the way, this is my email address, lkibbe@lkibbe.com. Feel free to send me an email. I'd love to answer your questions. And then you go.
Wow, that was gold. Yeah. That's gold right there. If nobody has any other takeaways today, take that with you, because that is so, wow, that's good stuff, Lorna, because a lot of people just get stuck in the Q&A mode, and it's this vicious circle of too much time, and sometimes irrelevancy becomes part of it. That's great. I'll stay around afterwards if anybody does have any questions, or I'll give you a way to contact me and I'll address your questions. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Well, we never want anybody to feel undervalued, because people sometimes ask stupid questions, Brett. I know that's shocking for you to hear, but sometimes they do. And, I'm comfortable when somebody asks a question that's completely off base. I don't answer it. I don't take up everybody else's time to answer that question. I will say something like this. Well, I'm not really sure that ties into what I've been talking about today, but that's really something to think about. I'm going to be around afterwards. Come on up and let's have a discussion. Who else has a question? and I just go on, so I don't take up the group's time with something that doesn't relate to the topic, to my purpose, to that group.
Okay, we do have another question. What was the best presentation you've attended and what made it so effective?
Oh my gosh, the best presentation I've attended. I've attended some really good ones, but I guess what comes to mind is what you should say, right? So I'll start with that. I saw a presentation from Patrick Lencioni, and he is the author of The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And he was at a conference that I was at, and he was one of the speakers. I think what made it really special for me, the thing that, his content was great, of course, because he was talking about teams, and that's a great subject, but he was so authentic and personable. It wasn't like he was a speaker on a big stage or with a big name. He just talked to people. He had a conversation with us. He talked to us about, he included us in it. And, we felt like we were part of what he was talking about, and I've talked about some of those techniques last week, and I will continue to talk about them. But I mean, just simple things like, instead of, saying to everybody, how many of you have ever done a presentation, which is like the whole group, using words like, have you ever done a presentation, which means you're talking to me, not whole group. You're talking to me when you ask, have you ever done this, instead of the whole group. He just had a lot of techniques like that, that it was just the authenticity. And, it wasn't forced. It wasn't memorized. It's like, you could see he knew what he was talking about. And he was sharing that with us. And I think just because he made us feel like we were just having a meeting with him, a conversation with him, it wasn't like a grandiose, speech or, any of that. So for me, that was really effective. Probably one of the ones that I saw. And I'll tell you one other one I'll comment on, because this one surprised me, and it was John Maxwell. I saw John Maxwell speak, and I had thought John Maxwell, he has written so many books that I was like, this guy couldn't possibly know what he was doing. Somebody's helping him write all those books. There's too many. But boy, that authenticity again, people were doing Q&A with him, and you could just see how deeply he understood what he was talking about and the passion that was coming. I guess the authenticity again is what really hit me. So, just being yourself and speaking with people about what your passion is, what you know, and your expertise.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for answering that. And thank you for the question. We appreciate it. Are there any other questions out there that we can give Ms. Kibbe before she wraps up? Okay, I think that you are free.
All right, so I will close. I know that you have the structure here, and I just want to point back to this again, because this was my big promise, and I want to make sure that you go away with this, that you have the structure that you can use over and over again for any presentation that you're doing. This will work. And we're going to talk about content next week and how to fill that in with content. So if you're interested in that, I hope you'll come back. Where to begin if you're still thinking like, I see your structure, but I just still don't know really how to even begin to put together a presentation. So here's a quick summary. The first thing is, what's the overall message? That's your purpose. What's the end result? What are you trying to do? What will be the next step for your audience? If you start thinking about that up front, what do you want them to do next? What's going to be that action step? What are they going to walk away going, oh, this is what I have to do? And then your 3 or 4 main points. Sometimes, like you saw that slide where I'm not proud of that slide where I showed you the picture of what I did. I had 20 main points, and it's like I had to figure out, wait, really, what are the 3 or 4 main points? What fits in the time period that I had? So figure out what your main points are. And if you need help with priority order, remember what I just talked about. Is it a catastrophe, or is it critical, or is it just something that you need for them to know? Your big promise, that's back to your purpose. What did I promise you today? I promised you I would give you a formula for a structure that you can use over and over again. Develop your roadmap. What is your model? I told you what we were going to do. First, I was going to do the upfront part to tell you how to get ready before you even began with your structure. Then I gave you the steps for the structure. And now I'm going to tell you what we need to do next. What we need to do next is come to the next session. Put these steps on your calendar, because what you've seen today is just a little part of doing a presentation. You really need to know how to get that content into it. So the next session is how to write the compelling content. Going to do that October 13th. And as you can see, there's a lot more to presentations here. We're going to go through these things. You see the schedule for it. So you have an opportunity here to really get a very strong, some very strong instruction on how to do presentations so that you don't have to be in that 90% of the people who say that they're more afraid of death than making a presentation. That's not necessary. We got you. So get these on your calendar. That's your next step.
Right.
Ready to wrap.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Lorna. We very much appreciate you as always. That is why she is not just a leadership expert, but she's also a presentation guru, as you're finding out. And I look forward to some of these other things. I would like to share my screen now with you about some upcoming things. And there we go. Hopefully everybody can see that. This today has been Designing Your Presentation with 6-Step Formula, presented by Ms. Kibbe. And we're very, very happy. I don't know about you, but I actually took it on my phone so that I have those 6 steps with me the next time I'm making a presentation. And upcoming events, we do have a full month in October. Starting on the 4th, we have the Psychology of Selling with Jay Mamie, as well as the Science of Yes on the 7th. We have Overcoming Objections on the 11th. All of those will be by Jay Mamie, as well as we're going to have a Bankable to Bankruptcy by Rebecca Schultz coming up on October 12th. That's something you don't want to miss as a small business owner, for sure, as you're trying to always focus on numbers as well as presenting those numbers. You can take a lot of things we learned today with presenting your numbers better. As far as October the 13th, developing your presentation. Of course, Ms. Kibbe just gave us her list complete. As you can tell, this is how we're going to continue our series on making and developing great presentations and being able to present them well. And we look forward to having her back. Eric Spellman will be here, how to rank well on Google and how to attract online shoppers during the holiday season with Ms. Marcia Hudson on the 19th. So as you can see, it will be a very full month. And as well, if you have any questions or you would like to meet with an advisor and go get a one-on-one session, you can do that at the SBDC website. Please feel free to go to sbdc.nctc.edu for more information about presentations and upcoming information, as well as schedule and time with one of the presenters. And this is going to conclude today's webinar. We thank you so much for all of you that attend, and have a great week.